Welcome to the Script to Scream podcast, where we delve into the spine-tingling world of horror cinema. Each week, we look at the scariest scenes, unmask the deeper meanings behind your favorite horror films, and explore the psychology of fear that keeps us coming back for more.
From script analysis to scene breakdowns, we'll be dissecting your favorite horror movies to see just what makes them tick. So whether you're a seasoned horror aficionado or just starting to explore the genre, join us as we unravel the spine-tingling stories that haunt the silver screen.
I'm Will.
And I'm Lee.
And welcome one and all to the premiere episode of the Script to Screen podcast. So thank you so much for entrusting us with your ears for the next 30 minutes or so. Hopefully by the time we wrap up here, you'll have a pretty good idea of what you'll be in for during our inaugural season.
Yeah, before we get into that though, let's tell you a little bit about ourselves and what we bring to the table. So Will, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a filmmaker, Lee, an utter film nerd, and currently in the final stretch of an MA in screenwriting. I'll be honest though, Lee, for all my cine love, I've never really honestly engaged with horror that much. So when we were thinking about doing this, I did some reflecting, and honestly, I think there may be a little bit of snobbishness there. But the real conclusion I came to is horror, it really seems to affect me in quite a negative way. So watching a horror film has historically been quite unenjoyable for me. But I do love a deep dive into film. And doing this with you has really kind of presented me with an opportunity to learn about the craft of horror, watch some horror films I really should have seen already, but also hopefully, I'm going to gain a greater appreciation of the horror genre. Something which for me has really been a bit of a cinematic blind spot up to now. Anyway, that's enough about me, Lee. You take the stage. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, like you, I'm in the final stages of a screenwriting master's degree at Falmouth University in England. Shameless plug. But unlike yourself, I'm a horror guy pretty much through and through. I cut my teeth on the genre, and I am a font of irrelevant movie trivia that will hopefully, God willing, finally be of some use, some practical use in my life. I spent most of my youth, my childhood, watching horror movies on VHS, reading Fangoria magazine. When I was a kid, I ran a monster hunting club, and we go exploring in like local ruins, digging through forests, and walking for miles and miles up abandoned railways in search of the supernatural. Thankfully, though, we would be armed with sharpened cricket stumps, a butter knife that we didn't realize wasn't actually real silver, and a length of scaffolding pole we christened Brick Smasher.
Oh, mate, could it actually smash bricks though, Lee?
Absolutely, but it was mostly referred to by its primary function, which was the door prop.
Okay, classic. Well, it's a weapon to rival Excalibur, no doubt about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, only the worthy could wield it. But anyways, I digress. Like Will, I am a screenwriter, not a successful one yet, but my singular goal in life is to write the scariest movie ever made. So watch out, C.R. Cargill. I am coming for your title.
I'm sure he's quaking his boots already, dude.
I don't doubt it. If you're not familiar with Cargill's work, check out Sinister and be sure to read the screenplay because it is a masterpiece.
Scientifically proven, I believe, to be the scariest movie ever made. Is that right?
Indeed, yes, it is. And who knows, maybe we'll cover Sinister in a future episode.
Maybe we will, Lee. Maybe we will.
No spoilers.
Okay, so that's enough about us. So let's talk a little bit about the Script to Screen podcast and what we hope to get out of it.
Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
There's always that hope, Lee. There's always that hope. But in truth, I mean, the podcast originated from a simple desire, really, for us to have a reason to stay in touch after the course ends. Is that right?
That is true. Yeah, the bromance endures. But in all seriousness, I mean, Will has a ridiculously in-depth knowledge of film, and as a director, I kind of feel like you bring a unique perspective to the table.
Oh, well, thanks, Lee. I do appreciate that. I'll do my best to offer something unique, some unique takes, hopefully. And just to blow some smoke up your arse, Lee, I mean, Lee is easily the most talented writer I've ever kind of come across. And his commitment and knowledge of horror is truly, truly inspiring.
Oh, dude, that was really cool. But let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're not a big horror fan. What is there like a specific moment where you kind of just went, nope, this is not for me, what happened to you that kind of put you off?
I think there is. I mean, I sort of have sporadically engaged with horror, in my sort of youth, and certainly have seen, a fair few sort of classic horror films from sort of maybe the 60s, 70s, that sort of era. But I think there was a moment, I watched 28 Days Later, and there was something about that movie. There was something about the sort of tenseness of that. There was something about the isolation of the protagonist. I don't know, dude. It just really kind of got to me in some way. Maybe there's something in my kind of psychology or psychological makeup that leaves me a little bit prone to sort of scary movies about isolation. But I don't know. There was something about that gave me nightmares for like weeks. I mean, I was 20 odd at the time, so it's ridiculous that I'm, dreaming about rage zombies kind of jumping through the windows. But dude, it totally kind of affected me, and I thought, you know what? This is pretty unpleasant. Like I'm not sure that me and this genre kind of jive together particularly that well. Yeah, so that was it, dude. I haven't really kind of engaged with horror that much since, to be honest. I mean, even the sort of the big horror films, I've just never really kind of, yeah, it's just not my jam. So I'm hoping, you're going to turn me on to it. I'm really interested in the craft, so I really want to learn, a bit more about that. But what about you, man? I mean, you are a horror fan. I mean, you are a big horror fan. So where
Yeah.
did how did this all come about for you? Where did your love of horror start?
I've always been kind of like into monsters and scary stuff and scaring myself ever since I was a kid. But I think my kind of breakthrough moment was when I first saw the original Halloween, like the very first like John Carpenter classic.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, but there was just something about that movie. I think the mythology of it, just the way it was shot. It just kind of affected me on like a subconscious level, and it was quite scary, but I wasn't like terrified by it. But I remember thinking like afterwards that was really good, like not just
Yeah.
like a scary movie or like a half decent horror movie. That was a really good film, and
Mm.
I think that's kind of what kind of switched me over to the genre and just like seeing how well done the horror genre can be. When it's
Yeah.
done well, I think it's pretty much the most effective sort of medium of cinema that there is. But anyway, enough about us. Let's talk about what we'll actually be doing. Now, this whole podcast thing is very new to us, so undoubtedly the podcast will evolve and improve over time as we get more and more feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, essentially what we're going to try and be doing is looking in greater depth at the horror genre itself. So, I mean, horror is, according to Phil Parker, it's one of the four main genres. Obviously, tone is going to play a massive part in that. But Lee, how would you describe the horror genre itself as a kind of starting point?
Well, in my mind, horror is about fear, and it's easily the most manipulative of all genres, but also the most straightforward in a way. I mean, long story short, a horror movie's singular goal is to scare you and to make you afraid. But, to kind of understand that, you have to kind of ask the question, what is fear exactly? Well, according to Oxford, fear means an unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger, pain, or harm. And I think that description hits perfectly on the key to what makes a movie scary. And the buzzword here is threat. It's the threat of violence, of danger that gets us on edge. So by putting characters in peril, we are vicariously experiencing that danger through them. And to a lesser extent, our own fear response is therefore engaged.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So why do you think eliciting an unpleasant emotion, if you like, proves to be kind of so enticing?
Well, the way I look at it, as a species, we don't really experience fear the way our ancestors would have. I mean, the only time we get scared in our day-to-day life is if something really awful has happened or has the potential to happen. And thankfully, for the vast majority of us, those times are very far and few between nowadays. So I think that the fear response, that rush of adrenaline, it appeals to us on a primal nature. But it's different for everyone. Some people love it, some people don't. But the thing about horror is that it never goes out of style. It will evolve and change to mirror the times. But like the themes it encompasses, horror will never die. It's always going to be here.
Yeah, it's a really great point because I think, horror does. very much evolve with the times, and you can see that in sort of the horror films that have been released over the years.
I absolutely agree. I mean, off the top of my head, 70s, it was all about the devil. You had like The Omen, The Exorcist. Just a few years earlier, The Forerunner, Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, so do you think that was caused by or a cause of the so-called satanic panic of the 80s?
I love that phrase. It just rolls off the tongue so well, doesn't it? Satanic Panic. Is there a band called Satanic Panic? If not,
Don't
there
know, there
should
should
be.
be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, quite possibly. I mean, the 70s culminated in Halloween, which we spoke about earlier, which kickstarted the slasher craze that dominated the 80s. Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees were the poster boys of 80s horror and created the slasher subgenre that endures popularity to this very day.
So the 80s were all about sex and death.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one could argue that this was due to AIDS being everywhere on the news at the time and reinforcing the fact that, sex is bad. So,
Yeah,
horny teenagers in the woods having premarital sex, you will be punished for it.
that's interesting. Okay, so what about the 90s?
90s things went meta with Scream, New Nightmare, John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, to name a few examples. So why was that? Well, I put it down to a little thing called the internet. I mean, the
Mm.
whole world was suddenly connected in an unprecedented fashion. And when people can share their opinions, people, boy, do they love to share their opinions. And by that, I mean people love to bitch about stuff.
They certainly do, don't they? They certainly do. So meta horror is possibly a result of people gaining more knowledge, insight, and kind of media literacy, maybe.
Yeah, and being able to share their innate assholeness with the world in general. But, this, like all the BS I spout, it is just my opinion. I mean, after the 90s, you had the noughties. Noughties, is that a thing? And they were split between so-called gore porn in the vein of Saw, Switchblade Romance, and Hostel, the unstoppable juggernaut of the found footage film genre. I mean, Blair Witch, Paranormal Activity, spawning yet another successful subgenre that not only survives but still thrives to this very day.
Okay. So where did these trends originate, do you think?
Okay, so gore porn, I'm going to pin on 9/11.
Ouch.
Yeah, I mean, well, think about it. The whole world pretty much lost its innocence that day. It heralded in a darker time where people were innately afraid of one another. And I think in order to take that power back, we took some pleasure in watching other people, usually deserving of their fate, suffer some pretty agonizing deaths. And found footage, well, I mean, that's all about technology, man. I mean, with the advancement of smartphones, social media platforms, everybody is now intimately involved with the format. I think more kids watch YouTube these days than cartoons, so it's only natural that the genre is going to adapt to that.
Yeah, I'm so glad I grew up when I did, you know?
Oh, me too, man. Me too. I mean, I was on the cusp of the internet and social media, so I got to play out as a kid until the streetlights came on, but still be savvy enough to adapt to the new world order.
Yeah,
Anyway, let's get back to the point. The tenties, the tweens. I have
I
no
think it's the
idea.
tenties.
The tenties. I like that. The
Yeah.
tenties. We're all about supernatural horror, bringing spooky back in a big way with, let's see, like The Conjuring and the Insidious franchises ruling the roost. And so-called elevated horror was also a pretty big talking point.
And why did the supernatural have such a resurgence? And, what exactly is elevated horror, Lee?
I'm not 100% on why the supernatural had such resurgence. I mean, part of me thinks that maybe the world had had enough grim reality and needed some escapism. Another, maybe more cynical part of me thinks it's almost entirely down to the genius business model of Blumhouse Studios. I
Mm.
mean, ghosts are usually pretty cheap. They rarely show up on film and spend most of their time going bump in the dark. So it's a license to print money, basically. As for elevated horror, man, I hate that term so much.
Why the hate, Lee? What's the matter with that?
I think because people tend to use it in a way that demeans or lessens regular horror movies, like horror is a dirty word or something to be ashamed of. So, in order to justify their enjoyment of a particularly good horror movie, they label it as elevated,
Mm.
quote unquote. Some examples of elevated horror, let's see, Get Out, Hereditary, The Babadook. I mean, they're all great films to be sure.
Okay, so what about the 20s? So if we were to look back a decade from now, what would be the horror themes for this decade, do you think?
Going by what we've had so far, I think technology is the big evil this decade. I mean, you've got the big unknown that is AI hanging over everybody's head, which has kind of led to the prominence of films like Megan and Subservience.
Yeah. Awesome. I mean, well, that sort of that sort of brings us up to date with the horror genre in general. Let's talk a little bit about what each episode of the Script to Screen podcast will be like. So each episode will be taking a look at a well-known
All fairly obscure.
horror movie and comparing the film scene by scene with what is written in the script. Now, sometimes these will be shooting scripts or earlier numbered drafts, depending on what is available.
So for the unenlightened, what is the difference between a shooting script and an earlier draft?
Well, Lee, an early draft of the script and a shooting script is probably sort of most easily sort of delineated by their proximity to production. So, an early draft of a script is generally just that. It's a draft of the script which generally hasn't had much input from producers, directors, or heads of department. A shooting script historically is a version of the script which is much closer to production. So the film has probably been greenlit by this stage, and people other than the writer have had a chance to add notes on things like camera direction and some technical details. So you can think of a shooting script as somewhere between an early draft and something like a final shot list.
Gotcha.
Now, we've designed the podcast to be accessible to everyone, but if you've seen the movie in question and or read the script, it's going to hit on a different level, but it's entirely dependent on yourselves how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go.
So if people haven't seen the film or read the script and would like to do so, how can they accomplish that?
Well, Lee, we'll be providing links to the scripts we use in the show notes of every episode, as well as on our website and social channels. As for the films themselves, we'll also let you know where you can check out the movies in question via streaming sites such as Amazon or Netflix, or if it's only available in hard copy, we'll obviously let you know that as well.
Brilliant. So what about those amateur screenwriters like us who may not really like horror movies? Will the podcast be too squeamish for them, do you think?
I don't think so, Lee. Definitely not. I would say not. We won't be playing any media clips, so the worst you're going to be subjected to is Lee and myself, massacring some spooky scenes.
Nothing will make you less scared than my love child of Wurzel Gummidge accent, which I apologize for.
You have the voice of a scarecrow angel, Lee. We will be also looking at the techniques that screenwriters use to create fear and tension in the scripts, which hopefully will prove of some interest even to those who aren't massive fans of the genre. But Lee, for our first season, you've picked a stellar list of titles for us to dive into. First up in season one is a timeless classic and a film that holds a special place in both our hearts, and that is The Monster Squad.
Oh man, the film that literally defined my childhood. I cannot wait to do that one.
Oh, me neither, dude. It's going to be so much fun. We're going to have a lot of fun doing this, and we hope you enjoy it as well. So until next time, do take care.
And keep on writing those scares.